Every empire falls the same way, slowly at first, then all at once. The year is unknown. The war, once contained, has consumed everything. For months, Russia held the line, a wall of steel and silence stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. But now, that wall is cracking. Inside the Kremlin, the lights flicker. The map of the front glows red, not from victory, but from collapse. And somewhere between the ruins of Belgorod and the frozen forests of Bryansk, the Russian front is breaking. This is the story of how a superpower falls, not with a single explosion, but with a chain reaction that cannot be stopped. It begins at dawn. At first, commanders dismiss it as a tactical withdrawal. Then the reports multiply, entire brigades disappearing, artillery units abandoning positions, communications going dark. Satellite images confirm it. A 40-mile gap opens across the central front. Ukraine's armored spearheads, now armed with Western precision systems, surge through. The breach isn't just a hole in the line, it's a wound. And from that wound, panic bleeds across the entire Russian army. In the first 24 hours, chaos spreads faster than the enemy. Logistics hubs ignite, supply routes vanish, fuel convoys are captured. The once feared war machine begins to eat itself. By the third day, the retreat becomes official, though no one dares call it that. State media uses words like regrouping and strategic relocation. But the footage tells the truth. Columns of soldiers walking, not marching. Tanks abandoned in mud. Commanders arguing on open frequencies. Russian air power tries to contain the breach, but fuel shortages and jamming cripple sorties. For the first time since 2022, Moscow's generals realize they've lost control of the battlefield. Inside cities like Kursk and Belgorod, the population wakes to a new sound, the echo of artillery on Russian soil. Panic spreads faster than the news. Roads clog with civilians fleeing east. The illusion of distance, the belief that war was always somewhere else, shatters overnight. The Kremlin goes silent. Internet traffic inside Russia drops by 60%. Independent voices vanish. The last journalists disappear. Only the state channels remain, replaying old footage of parades and speeches, pretending nothing is happening. But truth leaks through cracks. Telegram channels, intercepted transmissions, whispers between soldiers. And the truth is this: Russian forces are fighting each other. Confusion, miscommunication, betrayal. A fragmented army with no clear chain of command. In some sectors, local commanders surrender to avoid annihilation. In others, they turn on one another, blaming the collapse on treachery, on spies, on NATO, on fate itself. The empire is fracturing, not from without, but from within. 7 days after the breach, the Kremlin is in lockdown. The president hasn't been seen publicly in 72 hours. Rumors swirl of illness, assassination, or flight. Inside the corridors of power, generals argue over maps that no longer make sense. The nuclear command chain, once ironclad, now fractured among rival ministries. 3 separate factions claim authority to protect the state. No one knows who gives the final order anymore. Outside, protesters gather, not against the war, but against the silence. They want answers. Instead, they get curfews and fear. On the 10th day, the inevitable happens. The front disintegrates. Entire divisions surrender or vanish. Ukrainian units advance faster than NATO predicted, not because of strength, but because there's no one left to stop them. The world watches in disbelief. Commentators call it the fastest military collapse since 1945. But history students recognize it, a repeat of the pattern that ended empires before: denial, delay, disaster. In Moscow, military parades are canceled. Foreign embassies begin evacuations. The ruble collapses overnight. Banks freeze withdrawals, and for the first time in modern history, Russia closes its own borders. The war is no longer external, it's inside. Paramilitary groups loyal to regional governors seize control of local bases. Chechen forces pull south, guarding their own territory. In the Far East, Pacific divisions refuse orders from Moscow. What began as a war with Ukraine has become a war for Russia itself. The world watches live as a superpower implodes in real time. Global markets crash. Oil surges past $200 a barrel. Europe mobilizes humanitarian corridors for refugees. Not from Ukraine this time, but from Western Russia. China calls for stability. NATO calls for containment. And no one calls Moscow, because no one knows who's in charge anymore. Then comes the question everyone feared. Who controls the nuclear arsenal? Satellite imagery shows movement in several strategic bases. Missile silos go dark. Command convoys relocate east. Western intelligence agencies enter silent panic. The Doomsday Protocol is unclear. If the chain of command is broken, who stops the launch? For 48 hours, the world holds its breath. NATO forces move to DEFCON 2. U.S. bombers patrol continuously over the Atlantic. But then, nothing. The silence returns. No launch, no broadcast. Only uncertainty. Some believe the fail-safes worked. Others whisper that the system simply failed. No one knows, and that's the problem. By the fourth week, Russia ceases to function as a single nation. Millions flee east, towards Siberia and China. The West, from Smolensk to St. Petersburg, becomes a patchwork of warlord territories, each claiming to restore order. Infrastructure collapses, power grids offline, food distribution stops. The country with the largest landmass on Earth suddenly can't feed its own people. Foreign relief convoys never arrive. Roads are impassable, airspace contested. Inside bunkers, surviving ministers draft the Continuity Act, a desperate attempt to rebuild authority from fragments. But outside, people have already moved on. They form local militias, councils, barter systems. Survival replaces loyalty. The Russian Federation no longer exists. By 60 days, the world redraws its maps. New borders appear overnight. Kaliningrad declares independence under EU supervision. Chechnya announces full sovereignty. Siberian provinces begin negotiating trade with China directly. The old empire dissolves faster than it was built. World leaders meet in emergency summits. The goal: prevent chaos from spilling beyond Russia's borders. But it's too late. Weapons depots are looted. Black market nuclear material spreads. Cyber attacks surge across Europe and the US. The collapse has gone global, and everyone feels it. The fall of Russia sends shockwaves through every nation. Energy shortages, political crises, populist uprisings, a chain reaction of instability. In Washington, analysts argue whether this is victory or catastrophe. In Beijing, strategists quietly celebrate. A rival removed without a missile fired. In Europe, the question is no longer what next, but who's next? History has no pause button. When one pillar collapses, the rest of the structure always shakes. In the end, it wasn't bombs or sanctions that broke Russia. It was exhaustion, the slow decay of truth, trust, and time. Wars don't just destroy cities. They erode the foundations that hold nations together. When those foundations crumble, no weapon can save you. The world will study the collapse for decades, not as a story of enemies and allies, but as a warning, because every empire believes it's eternal until the front breaks. This is Crisis Timeline, where history, strategy, and survival converge, because understanding how the world collapses is the first step to ensuring it never happens again.